So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part.
China has to be part
of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order. And I think this would be a more stable one, where you would have a coordinated policies. I think the makings of it are already there, because the G20, in agreeing to peer reviews, effectively is moving in that direction.
Shalom everybody, it's me, Mr. 1223. I'm back with another video. This is episode 4 in my series, The Guide to the New World Order. I decided to skip the big banks and just combine that with the central banks, so that will be the next video. And I'm going to right on to the secret society section, which is right here in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. I think that lamp is too bright, and it may be make it hard to see some of this, but hopefully you can at least see the general layout. So in this video I will explain the secret societies, mainly under Vatican and Jesuit control, that have been used for secret meetings and acts throughout history. These are the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, the Freemasons, the Bohemian Club, and the Skull and Bone Society. Each of these have had many very powerful people in them, and I will explain their history and what they are and who is in them, of course. And I will also put down in the description a list of the people that I talk about in this video, in case you don't know how to spell their name or you want to look them up yourselves or something like that. So I'll put the list down in the description. The Knights of Malta is the first. That's their symbol, or a rough drawing of the symbol. I don't know if you can see that, but it's called the Cross of Malta. It's also known as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and it was previously called the Knights Hospitaller. The Knights of Malta is a Catholic secret society founded many years ago in 1099, and is exactly what it sounds like. It's a military order dedicated to carrying out the will of the Vatican, and they became allied with the Society of Jesus, which is also called the Jesuit Order, in the early 19th century in order to defeat Napoleon, take back control of Europe, and restore the Jesuit Order after the suppression of 1773. And there have been many famous and powerful Knights of Malta throughout history. William J. Donovan and Allen Dulles, who were two of the founders of the CIA. The other one was Harry Truman. They were both Knights of Malta. In 1973, the Jesuit in Malta controlled CIA, which I just talked about their founders, would later help fellow Knight of Malta, Augusto Pinochet, become the dictator in Chile. Argentinian President Juan Peron was also a Knight of Malta, and helped Allen Dulles and William Donovan protect the Nazis from persecution. Former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, I'm sure you've heard of him, was also a Knight of Malta. Joseph P. Kennedy, who was the father of John F. Kennedy, he was the chairman of the SEC and U.S. ambassador to the UK and a businessman, was a Knight of Malta. Pat Buchanan, advisor to Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and Holocaust denier with connections to the CIA, was both a Knight of Malta and a Jesuit. Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, who was responsible for the beginning of World War I after he declared war on Serbia, was a Knight of Malta. CIA member and author William Buckley Jr. was also a Knight of Malta, and a bonesman, or which is the name for somebody who's in the Skull and Bone Society, which I will talk about later. Former CIA director, it's the last one I'm going to talk about, but former CIA director John A. McCone, who served during Kennedy's administration, was a Knight of Malta. Former Goldman Sachs employee and current head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, is a Knight of Malta. Director of the CIA during the Reagan administration, William Casey, was a Knight of Malta. Oliver North, who worked closely with William Casey during the Iran-Contra affair, and was a Marine, was a Knight of Malta, or is a Knight of Malta. Jozef Retinger, founder of the Bilderberg Group, was a Jesuit and a Knight of Malta. The Knights of Malta are not the only people who are descended from the Knights Hospitaller. It's not the only group that comes from the Knights Hospitaller. There are other groups, although claiming to be Protestant, are ultimately allied with Malta and the Vatican. And this other group is normally called the Order of St. John. Queen Victoria was a Knight of Malta through this, or a Knight of St. John. Elizabeth II, who is the current Queen of the UK, is also a Knight of Malta, or a Knight of St. John. Multiple other princes and dukes of England have also been in this order, and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, co-founder of the Bilderberg Group, Nazi supporter, Chemical Corporation IG Farben employee, which I talked about yesterday, and friend of David Rockefeller and Nelson Mandela, was a Knight of Malta. And as you can tell by this list, the Knights of Malta and St. John are a powerful group, but they're only one of several groups that I'm going to list today. The next one is the Knights of Columbus, which is a group founded in 1882 in order to promote and defend Catholicism. And just like the Knights of Malta, many powerful people have been the Knights of Columbus. Samuel Alito, who is a current Justice of the Supreme Court, is a Knight of Columbus. Carl A. Anderson, former Special Assistant to Ronald Reagan, is a Knight of Columbus. John F. Kennedy, who was the President of the United States, was a Knight of Columbus. John Boehner, former Speaker of the House, is a Knight of Columbus and was Jesuit trained at Xavier University. Jeb Bush, former Governor of Florida and son of President George Bush and brother of George W. Bush, who was also president, is a Knight of Columbus. Jack Reagan, father of Ronald Reagan, was a Knight of Columbus. Terry Branstad, governor of Iowa and recently chose to be the U.S. ambassador to China, is a Knight of Columbus. Third secret society, which I wrote in two different forms right here, the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, which I realized that I should have just put Freemasonry on there now. But the third society is Freemasonry, which is the most well known on this list, I believe. It is a secret society founded in 1717 in London, which it was originally not under control of the New World Order, and the Catholic Church originally condemned it many times throughout the 18th century. But it was united with the Jesuit Illuminati in 1782 after the Vatican's suppression of the Society of Jesus in 1773. The two groups would try to overthrow the Catholics in Europe in order to reintroduce the Jesuit Order. In 1786, the French Rite of Freemasonry was founded, which later helped instigate the French Revolution. The Illuminists and Freemasons in France also founded the two groups, the Mountain and the Jacobin Club, which helped create the Reign of Terror in France, which executed the King and the Queen and many other political opponents during that period. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry was later created in 1801, and eventually the Jesuit Order allied itself with the York Rite of the U.S. and other rites of Freemasonry. The York Rite and Scottish Rite are now linked to the Order of Malta and the Society of Jesus, and have been controlled for at least 150 years. In the York Rite, there are three different bodies, each with different degrees. Royal Ark Masonry is the first, with its simple, with a symbol, not simple, symbol partially resembling the three nails at the bottom of the Jesuit symbol, which I will explain more about later. The second is Cryptic Masonry, which can be skipped, and the third is the Knights Templar, whose logo is a cross with the words "In hoc signo vinces" written around it, which is a Latin phrase which means "in this sign conquer." And I think I've talked about that on this channel before. The phrase comes from the supposed words the Roman Emperor Constantine heard while he was praying to the sun god Mithra just before he created the religion of Catholicism. In hoc signo vinces is also abbreviated on the Jesuit logo as IHS, in hoc signo, IHS, with the previously mentioned nails, the nails on which are similar to the Royal Ark Masonry symbol, in a V shape at the bottom. And just like the two other organizations I have mentioned, the first two, Freemasonry is filled with famous and powerful people throughout history. And I'm only going to talk about the Freemasons after the Illuminati agreement and the takeover of the U.S. So there were many Freemasons before, but they were not part of the plan for the New World Order. This includes U.S. Presidents James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Taft, Warren G. Harding, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Gerald Ford. All those U.S. presidents have been Freemasons under the control of the New World Order. The first NSA director, Ralph Canine, who was put there under Harry Truman, was also a Freemason. Nuclear scientist Enrico Fermi, founder of Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, former Chief Justice Earl Warren, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and director of the FBI J. Edgar Hoover, and John Jacob Astor IV, who was once one of the richest men in the world, were all Freemasons. The fourth group is the Bohemian Club. It is a group founded in 1872 that has had many influential people as well. It's mostly a Republican group. Bohemian Club goes to meet at the Bohemian Grove, which is an area in a redwood forest in California, where they discuss politics and perform strange rituals. The rituals include lighting a giant owl statue on fire while wearing Catholic bishop clothing, with public urination, heavy drinking, and Druidic customs. So basically they worship the trees and do a bunch of weird things and talk about politics. This is where the original planning for the Manhattan Project took place. Many Bohemian Club members have been nuclear scientists, but other Bohemian Club members include U.S. Presidents William Taft, Calvin Coolidge, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., and George Bush Jr. And I don't know why I didn't put it on here, but Herbert Hoover was there. Was a Bohemian Club member as well. So every Republican U.S. president since William Taft, except for Donald Trump, have been in the Bohemian Club. Former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Colin Powell was a Bohemian. Former Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of Labor George P. Shultz is a Bohemian. Former Secretary of State, National Security Advisor Bilderberger, and member of the CFR Henry Kissinger is also a Bohemian. Former President of the Bechtel Corporation, which I talked about yesterday, Stephen Bechtel, was a Bohemian. Chief speechwriter for George Bush and Bonesman, or a member of the Skull and Bones Society, Christopher Buckley, is a Bohemian. Former President of the World Bank and CEO of the Bank of America, Alvin Clausen, was a Bohemian. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who I'm sure you've heard of, is a Bohemian. The fifth and final group I want to talk about today is the Skull and Bones Society, a secret society founded at Yale University in 1832, and since used to train powerful people for the goal of the New World Order. Most of the activities are completely unknown, except for that the members are given names of pagan gods and legendary figures, and have stolen the skulls of Martin Van Buren, Geronimo, and Pancho Villa in the past. Prescott Bush, head of the Bush dynasty's U.S. senator and Wall Street banker, who helped fund Hitler, was a Bonesman. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Lovett was a Bonesman. Foreign advisor for JFK and LBJ, member of the CIA, Bilderberger, CFR member, and friend of David Rockefeller, Bill Bundy, was a Bonesman. His brother McGeorge Bundy, former National Security Advisor, former president of the Ford Foundation, and CFR member, was also a Bonesman. George H.W. Bush, son of Prescott Bush, former ambassador to the UN, former director of the CIA, and the 41st President of the United States, was a Bonesman. William F. Buckley, founder of the National Review and also a Knight of Malta, who I talked about earlier, was a Bonesman. Winston Lord, former president of the CFR, and I've mentioned the CFR many times. This is the Council of Foreign Relations, if you didn't know. That's on the pyramid right here. But he was the former president of the CFR and where is he? Ambassador of China and Assistant Secretary of State was a bonesman. Former Secretary of State John Kerry, who was also Jesuit trained at Boston College, was a bonesman. And son of George Bush Sr., former President of the United States and former Texas Governor George Bush, who was the president before Obama, was also a bonesman. And Steve Mnuchin, worker at Goldman Sachs and the current Secretary of the Treasury, is a bonesman. All the people I've named are part of these groups, which have been shown to be extremely dangerous and crazy. They are ultimately all pawns of the New World Order, and they join in these groups to meet with others in secret, recruit new members, train people for the New World Order, or to carry out operations. And the greatest and most influential group of secret societies is the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuit Order, which I will talk about in a later video, and I put them up here next to the Vatican because they have just as much influence on the New World Order as they do. These people have been running your country for many years, the people that I just named, and running different corporations and groups, and have influence from the Vatican and the Jesuit Order. I could even put this higher because of the people inside of here, because many of the people in these groups run central banks, big banks, corporations, governments. Many of them are in these different groups down here, like J. Edgar Hoover I mentioned. That would be police, directors of CIA, intelligence, any president I've mentioned, governments, any king or queen I mentioned, governments, any founders of corporations, or founders or presidents of corporations, like Stephen Bechtel, that would be there. People like Steve Mnuchin, who worked for big banks, Goldman Sachs. And then you also have people in the Bilderberg Group and Council on Foreign Relations and other think tanks. And also you had the president of the World Bank there too. So, like I've been saying, these groups are very influential and the people in them are very influential. And that is the point of this video. As you will see in the next videos in this series, other groups of people, central banks and all, you go up the ladder and you will see how the New World Order works. So that is all for today. Goodbye.